put it in somewhere else at the, later in the policy. It sounded to me like it's if they question residency, the families ask for more documentation, then they come back with more documentation. You know, that they're going through this whole process, and, you know, I guess the other point here is, so what is our process? If we don't know our process, having gone through what we just went through, if we don't know what our process is for our district, why would we want to leave it this way when it's so vague and we aren't even being notified as a board? I have concerns about that.
No, I hear it. I mean, it's one of the reasons I was in favor of trying to put in more guidelines here. I mean, I think there's a good argument for that, on putting in more guidelines so that we're giving direction to staff of what we think is appropriate for the reasonable inquiry. I don't know, you know, Carol, I don't see why reasonable efforts include but are not limited to. I mean, we can put in phone calls, we can put in other things. We don't want to put in too many things that make it sound like nothing else is appropriate, but we could do that. It just starts making this longer, but we could do that.
It also takes away the flexibility from the district's perspective. I think we need to afford the district flexibility in the process.
Jason, just a very minor aside, I think it would be a little clearer if we are keeping that language on that last sentence, to say reasonable efforts to determine residency. Because every time I read that paragraph, I'm always like, reasonable efforts, I have to go back and look and see what we're talking about.
You know, line 26?
26,
Yeah.
reasonable efforts to determine residency. So if we end up leaving that in, I just think that would be a little.
So we're not striking include but not limited to, we're just adding.
Just adding right before that.
So since you guys studied this and came up with this wording, did you look at other policies for this paragraph?
No other policies?
You know what's interesting? No, most other policies, because this is from the statute, mimic this language up here.
Mm-hmm.
No one else has attempted to do what we're trying to do here.
Policies are leaving
In the policy
flexibility
that we could
to
follow.
the district.
I think there's benefit to it for the reasons we're discussing, but no one else has tried to do it, probably because of Matt's observation that more, and council gave us that feedback. Just like council liked alternative arrangements, they don't like this because they're saying, well, gee, as soon as you try to do a list, then you've limited flexibility.
Right, so even though we're trying to show that it's just a list, it's examples, includes but not limited to, you know, the inclination is, look, he wants to maintain as much flexibility as possible, so, you know, that's why districts have that first paragraph, but don't have the second one in there.
And with an appeal, it's up to the board then ultimately to decide what's reasonable at any given time.
That's really all I care about.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that I agree with that. I also care about what happened and that it, you know, was not right for the family. I mean, I don't know if we hired the wrong private eye and he used bad judgment or what. But why would a private eye that we're hiring to verify whether someone lives in Orinda, why would they go somewhere else to see if they live somewhere else? You know, there's issues like that that we aren't addressing just by looking at this policy that I feel like we've never finished talking about. And we can say that we don't want to tie ourselves into a knot by having this too, you know, restrictive here, but this is the only thing that we've come up with to talk about in relationship to that situation. And I just think that was, you know, that maybe it was the private eye that totally, you know, had bad judgment and did the wrong thing. But if we have that kind of result, then we need to change something here.
So I want to.
It doesn't happen again.
I want to agree. Let's take the instance of a private eye gone wrong. What this policy tries to ensure is that when that, in the present world, we may have no control over that until after the whole thing is over. Whereas in this policy now, hopefully, if that happens, we have the review to review that specific situation and what happened, because there's a review right here. So that's what, I mean, that is what the policy is trying to address. The policy is trying to look at the situation and look at a situation like that and say, okay, this is the way we review it. I know what you're saying about the past situation, but that's what this is trying to do. It gives the board that authority to oversee a contract like that, oversee a situation like
Well, in fact, we're trying to review a situation that went wrong, and this is the agenda item that we were given to talk about. So if we're talking about it here,
Right.
how are we addressing when we've got a private eye that had bad judgment, or however you want to describe what he did?
I have
mean,
an idea. I have an idea. I would sort of like to see a protocol, and a general protocol, which could go into a governance handbook. There's nothing wrong with this at all in here. It was in the implementation, clearly. So, you know, for instance, at another time in a governance handbook, we could outline some protocols for an investigator saying, you know, you can't just make a visit on one day and assume that this person lives in this location based on one day they're being there. You know, maybe you have to go to the home, the registered address 3 times over a period, on different days over a period of 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not something for this. That's something that's an administrative thing that could go in a governance handbook, and it's not limiting that way. Does that make sense?
Well, what you're describing makes sense, to have a process written out, steps that the administration would use. That to me isn't what you put in a governance handbook, because a governance handbook is what we, the board, use to communicate with each other and with the superintendent, and it wouldn't be that specific. But I think what you're describing is the steps that that the district would use to implement this.
Yeah, but I don't think that you want to put that in your bylaws, Sarah.
No, I wasn't, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, I see what you're saying. You're saying just describe the steps that the administration would use.
Right.
Yeah. The question is, who's gonna write that? What are they gonna say?
Well, I mean, if we're not putting that in this policy, which I don't think we should, I mean, I'm comfortable with leaving the language that we have in here with the illustrative examples, leaving it broad enough for the flexibility for the district to.
I mean, nobody wants to do this again. We don't
Right.
want to.
So I think we move on from, I mean,
Yeah.
if we have a majority that are comfortable with this, we move on.
I think with your change to determine residency, I don't mind adding phone calls,
Okay.
Yeah, why don't we put in there,
not limited to.
calling the home?
Just as an example.
As an example,
That's
yeah,
fine.
just one more example.
But, I feel like we should be like directing Joe to come up with a list so that when this comes up next time, his staff has steps to do. I don't know if he feels that's inappropriate,
But
but,
what we're saying is, it's our job to set this policy. Joe's gonna do what we put here.
Mhm.
What we're saying is, we wanna give staff flexibility. We don't
well,
wanna
they
write
had
specific
flexibility,
steps.
they had flexibility in this last situation, and it got really.
That's why we're
pushed back.
rewriting our policy.
And that's why we have a review now.
Well, so how is what we're rewriting here, how is that gonna change anything in the last example of what happened a couple of months ago? I could see the same thing happening over again with this stated this way. Yes, later on, we've got 10 days to come up with additional documents, that's fine, but I mean, in this part, where you have, failure to verify residency. Say that there's a situation where they think that maybe a student isn't really a resident, and then they're gonna proceed to investigate. The same thing could happen over again as what happened before. And that was before the family even was aware that there was a residency issue. Before they were would have been given an opportunity to come up with more documentation. That's my concern about it.
I think that's dealt with here on
Where?
page 131.
131.
I don't know, I could be wrong.
So there are two things. One thing that you'll see is different is that the notice to the notice that's done in the initial notice includes the rationale for the decision. So there's more communication about those reasonable,
So wait,
reason
let's,
to believe.
before you get it, you're in the
Yeah.
middle of the paragraph. Before
Yeah.
you get there,
Yeah.
if you look at the top, I mean, I forget what's,
yes,
we just skipped 2 pages here.
Yeah.
Determining residency, and then residency for homeless and foster youth, then revocation of enrollment.
right,
Okay, if the superintendent or designee upon investigation determines that a student's enrollment or attempted enrollment is based on false or unreliable evidence of residency, right there, so he, the superintendent could have, tried to, you know, going back to the previous page, 128,
yeah,
could have sent a private investigator, decided that the student didn't really live there, and then proceeds here with, okay, he determines that they don't live there, and now, right, and then you continue on here.
right. But now, all this is different. Now, the letter that goes out has to state the rationale behind it in a written decision.
And it tells them that they have a right
Right.
to provide new
More
evidence, or a right to appeal the decision to the board.
And they can either jump right to the board or put in new evidence or do both.
Mhm.
So we try to make
So
that
this
as,
part is good, because then you are
Yeah.
notifying the family.
we're trying to, you know.
That's good. I
Yeah.
just wish it was, something more earlier in this other page, because this is after the investigation.
I mean, that's
And
true.
You've hired a private eye to go investigate when, you know, how do you really know there was a problem? It's all based on reasonable this and reasonable that in someone's judgment. And that's the piece that's, difficult.
I understand it. I think what we're trying to do is, and this is what other policies have, and it's kind of like the court system, right? You want to have 2 stages. You want to have a stage of the administrator doing something and recognize they're going to make mistakes. And then you have an appeal process that takes it from there based on a really clear set of communications and evidence. And what I think this policy tries to do is add that second part. That from here on page 131, it's trying to spell out all the things that have to be spelled out to the family, so they're communicated to, and then gives the board the opportunity to review it.
Since we're on page 131,
Yeah,
the online 4, the district may request verification of residency at any time. I can't remember why we deleted that.
oh,
I feel like we should
Which
have
page
that
are we
in there.
on?
On page
Back
1,
on
we're on
131.
131.
Line
yeah.
4,
Line 4 to 5.
Oh, four.
the stricken line, why is it stricken? The one you have to read through.
I feel like we should keep that in.
It seems kind of redundant.
oh, or maybe what we're thinking is moving that, because it's not really about
It doesn't
revocation,
really fit there.
it's about verifying residency. Oh, there,
Do
we have it like the
somewhere
3rd
else?
time, the district may request verification of residency at
Where
any
are you?
time. And then we have on line 25, on page 128, the district reserves the right to request any additional proofs.
Right, well, that's the thing that I talked about
Yeah, before, it's kind of like saying the same thing. Useful
I mean,
to,
so the process is, you know, certainly where we focused our attention, this, you know, this
Later
appeal
part.
process. Yeah, because, like I said, we're trying to find a way to do it in a timely way, so that it wasn't,
Mhm.
you know, a semester long or longer process. And I think we came up with that.
I think so too. I think, it seems to me that the important lessons to learn is that everybody has a right to appeal. They have a right to know, or we're giving them this, we're not calling them rights, but we say, we will give an appeal, and there's a place to go, and that's the board. And, where was that?
Well,
Yeah, that they have a right to it.
They have a right to know
Be
why
They
the
have a right to know
residency
why,
was
yeah.
denied.
It is definitely shifting the burden, and that was a big
We
thing.
debated that
is,
too, yeah.
You know, it is shifting the responsibility to the board, and that's, you know, a purposeful shift.
Right. I think that's more compassionate anyway.
Well, and then it has us assert and oversee something. It's
Right.
not something happening invisibly that pops up in a situation. It's a process that probably does come to us every once in a while. Or at least the opportunity of having it come to us makes it much
The
more,
opportunity,
yes, makes it,
just like the opportunity for a complaint, but, so, we'll see what, but, yeah, it's good, I like what you did here on page 131. That was good, when it goes on to the next page. So did you discuss this with the attorney?
yeah.
Okay,
You
and
did.
was this all new, because this is all underlined?
It's all new.
It's all new. And what we did is we started with
That's why
Lafayette.
it took us.
This was the biggest. We started with Lafayette, but it was not, we did not, once you started digging into it, first of all, from what we understand, it's never been used.
Oh,
And it was very cumbersome. So we just sort of went back at it and tried to tighten it. So this is new stuff.
mhm.
I mean, it's similar to the others. I don't want to overstate that, but
Right. No,
It's-
I mean, it's definitely, you know, doing more than
Yeah.
what you'll see at Kapalani's or Maraza with their policies, and it's definitely going a step further.
and we tried to draw on
Yeah,
lessons.
but we were
from
trying,
this.
but, you know, Lafayette's policy seemed to almost give more rights than, like an expulsion student would have, and it just, it was
They
too much.
created a
and
hearing
too-
officer
right, and it became
within
very
the staff,
expensive.
which didn't, it seemed to be a step away. If we want to get the board right away.
Right. And we were trying to also be cognizant of cost
Yeah.
issues and trying to keep this as, you know, like I said, a streamlined process that would, give more process and be more fair, but still be, can be done in a timely fashion.
Yeah, we made tight timelines. If you compare this with the Lafayette, you would have seen longer periods of time. We made them quick periods of time on the administration side in particular, so that, you know, it gets here.
Mhm,
It needs to get here.
mhm. Okay. Well, I'm okay with this last part, I just have to think about this
And
other
line
page.
3 of page 131, it should be of residency, not on
Yeah,
residency.
you're right.
Well, I want to thank you guys for taking this wildcat on.
Yeah, thanks for all your work on this.
We're gonna get public comment.
I think that's,
Okay. We do have one speaker card, Marion Storch.
Let's see.
Oh, sorry.
Do I need to speak the card then? Let me grab one. Sorry.
Everyone, I'm Miriam Storch. I live on Minor Road. I'm the employer of Maria. I've read the revised policy carefully, and I appreciate the tremendous effort that's gone into it. I think the most significant and positive change is that an appeals process will be offered, that the appeals process has been spelled out, and that the child's enrollment will be protected until the grown-ups have sorted out the details of that appeals process. But as has been touched on tonight, there's nothing in the revision to prevent the investigation from being as one-sided as Maria's investigation was. We think that the regulation should require that the parent or guardian of a child whose residency is being investigated be afforded a reasonable opportunity to present their side of the story and additional evidence of residency prior to the district making an initial determination about their residency. I mean, why not? If the goal is to get to the truth and the facts of what's actually going on, why not give the parent the opportunity to participate in that process? As currently drafted, they are only allowed to present additional evidence after receiving a notice of denial or revocation of enrollment. The proposal also indicates that during the appeal, the board's decision, quote, shall be based solely on the evidence available to the superintendent or designee when making his or her final decision. The board shall not reopen the record to consider evidence that was not presented to the superintendent or designee, end quote. There's no reason for the board to handcuff itself in this way. If there is additional evidence, the board should have the discretion to consider it if it wishes. The goal here again is to get to the truth and to the facts. Therefore, all evidence should be considered as it becomes relevant or as the parent determines it may be relevant. It is also easy to imagine a circumstance where somebody, unrepresented by a lawyer and perhaps with English as a second language, might not have presented their evidence all at once. The parent or legal guardian should be able to present any additional evidence they have at the appeal stage in order to support their claim of residency. Lastly, the draft policy still requires that a minimum of 3 documents be presented in support of a person's residency. This is much more restrictive than the state statute, which states that, quote, a school district shall accept from the parent or legal guardian of a pupil reasonable evidence that the pupil meets the residency requirements for school attendance in the district. That's California Ed Code 48204 1A. It does not specify a minimum number of documents that should be submitted, and we understand that as recent statute, Assembly Bill 207, was enacted precisely to stop school boards from imposing this type of inflexible and overly burdensome requirement. As an aside, I will say that unannounced home visits are a perfectly reasonable idea to me, and had one or several been offered to us, none of this would have happened. And the use of a private investigator for that purpose seems, again, perfectly reasonable. It would not be a huge expense, and again, would get straight to the truth and the facts and the reality of what's happening. So I think if you could find a way to do that, I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles Shannon.
Charles Shannon, OEA president. I'm really going to speak as an individual. Not everybody knows this, but my partner went through an asylum case, and I was imagining myself, because I have a lot of friends, and this does not just include LGBT folks, but also heterosexual folks who one member of the family has come from another country and is trying to establish residency and may have a child. And it could be that they're in just a sole income earner household where the person that you're living with and may have lived with for many years doesn't meet the requirements of the residency that I see listed in this document, but truly is here as came into the country legally and is trying to establish their residency. My partner established his through an asylum case, and I was thinking, what if he had had a child like many of our friends have and wasn't able to meet that? I would think reasonably they should be able to be involved in an interview. I would not want my partner to go to a school site and have to explain a very confidential, very upsetting situation. People that go through asylum cases have to be under the care of a psychologist, a psychiatrist, often are on medication because of having to relive a very traumatic experience from their home country. My partner also speaks limited English. Didn't know any English when he came into this country, had very little English when we met. I could not imagine that if he had a child, having to go to a school site, relive an experience in broken English, and try to explain to the secretary of the school, who is the first contact person, that we have a very unique situation. I really feel that there needs to be some type of an interview process with a person that's going to maintain our confidentiality in a situation that we don't want people within the school to know our situation, We wouldn't want our child to possibly hear people talking about the fact that they could be illegal. I'm just very disturbed by the fact that it would go to a private investigator. I'll just give an example. There was one evening, and I don't know why this person was at our home. I don't know why they were trying to establish that he lived in our home. But we got a knock on the door. It was a light knock. Then it was a more aggressive knock. We got real quiet in our condominium. And then all of a sudden I heard, this is Officer, and I'm just going to use just a random name. This is Officer Smith, really assertive. It scared me. I've never had police officers come to my home. I looked in the peephole and I only saw a face. I couldn't see a uniform. So I opened the door because I've learned to really respect law enforcement. And it was a plainclothes person. And they said they were undercover, but they were a police officer. It was a very scary situation. We came to find out this person was not undercover, was doing some type of investigation. We were the wrong home. It was very frightening to be opening my door late at night. I really think you have to look at this carefully, because if we followed what you're setting out, you would miss, millions of Americans could go through a very traumatic experience with the current conversation that I'm listening to. And there's so many people out there in this situation who are in this country legally, are trying to establish their residency, are in an alternative family arrangement. I took offense to the conversation about alternative family arrangements. There's a lot of alternative family arrangements, and I agree with your counsel. That needs to stay. There's a lot of us out there. We need to be protected. We're vulnerable. It's scary for us. We don't necessarily want our sexual orientation out there. Or if you're in a heterosexual relationship, maybe you don't want, this whole idea of sharing with people that you're in an asylum case that makes you a very fragile person. So I really want you to think about this carefully, please. It's very important to my family, and it's very important to many families throughout this country. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Colleen Sullivan.
Hi, is it all right if I just stay right here and talk?
Sure.
Okay.
Can you stand up so we can hear you?
Yes.
Thank you.
Colleen Sullivan. I want to return to your thought about having families come in and show affirmation of where they live on an annual basis. When Miramani does this, and I've been through that experience myself, they have 4 very large parking lots available for people to come in. If you start thinking about our elementary schools and having every single family coming every single year at the beginning of the school year, you may have to start with an environmental impact report. Thereafter, I really want to encourage you to familiarize yourself more with what goes on at a school prior to the school year beginning. It is probably the most frantic time of the school year for everyone, principal, office clerk, secretary, down to the teachers. So if you're planning on taking the time to have the clerk and the secretary registering all of these people and checking their identification, that is going to trickle down onto everybody else who's at the school. Some of you are probably familiar with the fact that often teachers are there setting up a good 2 weeks before. So when you think about the clerk who's doing the ordering and things are coming in and we're all pitching in on unpacking, and the secretary is trying to take care with registration and what goes on with your, I think it's called your SASE, is that what it's called? And some of the challenges that come up with that, and I've seen the secretary nearly having a breakdown by the time we're starting school because so many changes have had to be made to the report. It's a very, very frantic time of year to be asking people to do this on an annual basis. So just a couple of bits of information there that might help.
Thanks, Colleen. Lana Hornbuckle.
Hi, I am the registrar at Orinda Intermediate School, and
Very qualified, important.
don't make me laugh because I normally don't get up and speak, so, but I felt like I needed to. I just wanted the board to know that I hear what Colleen is saying about the beginning of the school year. It is frantic, we're all running around trying to get things done. But I also think that it's very important that you think about the residency annually. Maybe not every year, or not every grade level, but you did mention kindergarten, 3rd grade, and maybe 6th grade. I think it's very important that this be done. I've asked to do it before, And I was this close to doing it this year, this school year, but I didn't have, I felt like I wasn't being represented, or there was no backing for me to do this. It was like, yeah, go ahead and do it. But there was no one saying, hey, that's a great idea, you know, let's sit down, let's discuss it, what should we do? And, you know, so I just dropped it. Another reason I think it's important is I keep in contact with Miramonte for the 8th grade students going over to Miramonte. I give them a lot of information so that they can contact these kids when they are going over to 9th grade. When I get a phone call from their registrar saying, oh, so the information that you gave me for so-and-so, their address is, we don't have that address, or you gave me the wrong address that they have given me. That makes me feel like I'm not doing my job correctly. Because why didn't I know that this person moved? People move over the summertime, they don't contact the school, we have no idea that they've moved. So I really think that it's important that parents notify the school somehow, even if it is kindergarten, 3rd grade, or 6th grade. At least we have something. I mean, we've got families that have been here for forever. You know, kindergarten through 12th grade. You know, how do we know that they've moved? We don't. We don't do a lot of home mailing anymore. Once in a blue moon we do. You know, I do a few once a month. Sometimes they come back, and sometimes they don't. I got some in the mail today that a teacher had mailed home that came back with the wrong address. We had no idea that they moved. Now I have to investigate. I have to call the family. Can you verify where you live? Okay, so, I mean, there's that. And also I think you guys brought up that in the ed code, I think a while back, I think when Lorene first got here, I discussed this with her, and I gave her that ed code for annual. Don't ask me what it is now, because I couldn't find it. I looked for it.
Yeah.
It's way above me. So if you guys have someone that can look into that, I really suggest that they should look.
Thanks, Lana.
Because, okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So Joe, maybe we could do we could have some sort of conversation with each of the different offices about how they would be impacted with an annual or every other year or something like that, verification of residency.
Well, as I mentioned before.
Yeah, I forgot, sorry.
There could be a lot of different models and ways to verify residency.
Right.
I think a lot of great points have been brought up in public comment. So I think there are a lot of different ways it could be done if it's something we decide we want to have done. And I think it'd be important to get the input from our stakeholders, including superintendent, on the best way to do it. You can do it alphabetically, Monday could be A through G, and,
Yeah.
There are ways to try and stagger it, et cetera. Obviously, the elementary schools have a lot smaller student population than the high school. It seems like there are ways we can get around it. I think we've had a really fruitful discussion, a really long discussion, so we'll be back for discussion again next month. Thank you. Next, we have item C, Governor's Proposed Budget for 2015-2016. Ms. Farrell?
I wake up to PowerPoint.
in January, on the 9th of January, the governor came out with his January proposal for the budget year 2015-16. Some of the themes of the governor's budget included that there was a positive economic growth within the state, that Prop 98 would continue to receive most of the new money, and that funding was tight for the non-Proposition 98 side of the budget. The governor is continuing to support both the local control funding formula and the LCAP, or the Local Control Accountability Plan. The wall of debt continues to come down, and overall it was a good budget year for public education. This chart illustrates the funding under Prop 98 back to 2007-8, and then what's projected for the 14-15 year and what's included in the governor's budget proposal for 2015-16. Proposition 98 sets the minimum funding for school districts, but how it is spent on the different programs is decided by the governor and the legislature. And this is just a sample of how the money could be divided up and the different programs that vie for those funding dollars. So what was in the state budget?